Welcome everybody to a new episode with Astrid, your APD, your dietitian with T, no C. We're going to be having today a very special guest that I have had before, but today is going to be another great conversation with Naiman. Please join me, stay with me, get excited because we're going to have quite a few questions around satiety, protein, the PE diet, types of hunger, and quite a few more things that probably a lot of people tend to ask quite often. For those who don't know you as much or are interested in hearing a bit more about your story, who is that Naiman?
Right. Well, I'm just a primary care doctor here in the U.S. in Seattle, and I've been super interested in lifestyle medicine, basically diet and exercise for optimizing health. And I've been researching that for 20 plus years, ever since I got out of residency. And so I'm just very interested in scientific literature and research and anything that talks about any form of exercise and any specifics when it comes to diet. And then I think my specialty is trying to convert this information into something brief and actionable and practical. Just because I have so many patients, I have thousands of patients, I get 15 minutes with each patient because I'm a lowly primary care doctor. And so for me, it's just like, okay, what's the most important messaging? What's the biggest rock in the jar? What's the most practical take home for people? Like, what is the very bare minimum that you need to know? So I'm all about, the minimal effective dose of exercise to make some changes, the minimal effective changes you could tweak to your diet to like have clinical differences. And then I'm just constantly looking at clinical outcomes because, I'm always looking at everyone's metabolic status and insulin sensitivity or resistance. And so all day long, it's just people in various stages of health and metabolic health and, tons of obesity and type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome and all this kind of stuff. And so it's like, I'm kind of where the rubber meets the road in terms of uh, people who are super healthy and trying to be optimal, and then people who are super unhealthy and just trying to stay alive and not die of diabetic complications or something. So I've got the whole spectrum there, and I'm just trying to implement diet and exercise tips as as a practical fashion as I possibly can.
With the population you work with, are they mostly people that are needing to have a dietary intervention for weight loss, or it's just more general overall?
It's absolutely everything you can imagine. So, right now, 52% of adult Americans are pre-diabetic or diabetic. So just
Hmm.
statistically, half of everyone who walks through the door has a serious problem. But the reality is about 90 plus percent of Americans have some parameters of metabolic syndrome, are not in optimal metabolic health. So almost everyone has some room for improvement. And half the people walking the door have a ton of room for improvement. So yeah, there's no shortage of people who could use some like little helpful hints and tips on their diet and exercise and things like that.
Something that is very interesting is that when we have patients coming through the door to talk to us, a lot of them, one may not be even aware that they have an issue with their metabolic health or they have insulin resistance. They have no idea what's going on. They know that probably they are a little bit overweight or they have obesity, but they are not aware of what are some of the potential consequences or how to deal with certain conditions. So how do you go about working through behavior change or just increasing awareness for the patient just to take action? Because sometimes they are not even ready to change. And so how can you help them transition to, okay, there is a problem and we should do something about it? How can you go about in like getting them ready or at least motivated without giving them like you have to be scared about this, like just a different way of changing behavior?
Right. Well, the first thing I like to do with most clients is some fasting lab tests. And, when somebody has an A1C come back in the pre-diabetes range, I mean, that's kind of a big deal. A lot of people don't realize that. And you're, hey, you're officially pre-diabetic. Watch me enter this into your chart as an official diagnosis. This is an actual problem. You need to face this head on. Here's how we're going to fix it. There are some little things you could do with diet and exercise that would completely reverse this and turn it around. So just labeling people with pre-diabetes officially, giving them a formal diagnosis code on their chart, very, very powerful. For a lot of people, that's just like, hey, I cannot be in denial when I can't say I don't have any medical problems anymore. I have pre-diabetes. I'm very, very quick to label people with pre-hypertension, stage 1 hypertension, anything that's not completely normal. If your BMI is above the normal range, we're going to talk about that. You're technically overweight based on BMI. I mean, I know BMI needs to be taken with a large grain of salt. We're measuring waist circumference at the belly button and doing waist to height ratios that should be less than 0.5. So it's actually testing fasting triglycerides, HDL, these different parameters of metabolic syndrome like waist circumference and lipids and fasting glucose and A1C. And it's pretty easy to label people with some or all of the components of metabolic syndrome. And then I'm like, hey, you have metabolic syndrome. This is insulin resistance. This is pure overfatness, and you can absolutely reverse it with diet and exercise. And here are the small little changes you can make that, as long as you're even halfway consistent, you're going to change the course of this problem from just steadily getting worse. And every American's just gaining a pound a year and ending up 30 pounds overweight. And that's a very small upward trajectory. And you could make a couple little tweaks and get that to be a downward trajectory and just cruise right down your ideal body composition and stay there. And that's what it's all about. But for me, the first step is actually labeling people. So I can say, hey, you have a problem. It's like Alcoholics Anonymous, where the first step is admitting you have a problem, right? We're gonna label it. We're gonna, I have a lot of patients who tend to be in denial. Like they think they kind of don't have diabetes. And I'm like, you have diabetes. Say it with me. You have diabetes. I have diabetes. I am a diabetic. We're writing it on your chart. Here's your diagnosis code. I'm billing your insurance for it. This is happening. And so you can't let people be in denial. And that's not what anybody wants to hear. It's what people need to hear. So unfortunately, all day long, I am giving people bad news and telling them what they need to hear instead of what they want to hear. So I'm not very popular. I don't get invited to a lot of parties. But that's what it's all about, is basically just, hey, holding up a mirror, and this is what's going on with you. And, this is real. And these are the diseases that you're at increased risk for, 2x on half the cancers you could possibly name, all sorts of cardiovascular disease and chronic neurodegenerative diseases and things that risks all of these things go up significantly. And so for me, that's where it's at. It's basically testing people, labeling them, and then forcing them to get real about it.
Once you have identified that and have had a very serious chat with them about what the diagnosis is, what is kind of like the next step that you take to get them to do something? Like, what are the next action points for you? Now you have a condition, you have diabetes, or you have high triglycerides, you have your HbA1c is high. What we need to do about it? Let's put some practical steps to actually make a change in the next 3 months.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so for me, the first thing is there's a bifurcation where we're like, there are two lifestyle things you're going to do to fix your prediabetes or metabolic syndrome or insulin resistance. And it's diet and exercise. And there are equal importance. And we could start with whichever one people want to. But on the exercise side, the vast majority of people who come in to see me do not have any kind of formal exercise program. And then there's a bifurcation there where I'm like, you're going to have a formal resistance training program. I don't care if you're just going to do one set of push-ups once a week. We're going to write it down. This is your resistance training. You have to do this. We're going to start with something super small and super manageable and that you will absolutely achieve because it's that easy. And then we're going to progressively overload it from there, just like adding plates to the bar. But we're going to have some sort of formal exercise program and we start with the very smallest thing people could possibly commit to, and then some sort of formal cardio. You are going to do some sort of cardio where you're taxing your cardiorespiratory system. And I don't, maybe it's just going to be incline walking a mile a week or something microscopic to start with. And then we're just going to progressively overload it once it's a habit. But what you're not going to have is no formal exercise program at all. Like nothing. I don't know. I walk sometimes. I walked from the parking lot to get in the clinic today. That's not it. So you need formal exercise and some sort of cardio, some sort of resistance. Very, very formal about it. Writing it down, picking something microscopic that you just will achieve. Like you can't not achieve it. It's so stupidly easy. You know what I mean? And then on the diet side, we also start with basically two things, another bifurcation. Number one is protein prioritization. Your whole goal with your diet is to eat all this protein first before you eat any carbs or fats. You need a protein minimum. It's going to be based off of your ideal body weight. And you're going to achieve that. You're going to target the protein the first thing in the day, the first thing in every meal, the first thing before you eat anything else. It's going to be protein first. You know what I mean? That's step one. The second bifurcation is when it comes to carbs and fats, you're going to choose the lowest energy density carbs and fats you can. You're going to get more carbs from, salad and less carbs from straight up sugar. You're going to get more fats from avocados and nuts and meat and less fat from oil and butter and heavy cream. You're trying to keep the refinement low on the carbs and fats, the energy density low on the carbs and fats. So it's protein prioritization, carb and fat density lower than whatever you're eating before. And we start by just like making little changes to each meal. Like, okay, what do you have for breakfast? You have 50 donuts and then 1 egg. Okay, we're going to change the ratio where you eat 49 donuts and 2 eggs. And then we're going to go for, eventually you're eating 2 eggs, a cup of egg whites, and a quarter of a donut. And that's how we're going to progressively overload that. But it's basically whatever you're eating now, the protein goes up, the carbs and fats go down. And then the ultimate goal is a lot of protein and then very low energy density carbs and fats, or lower than people were eating. But both of these are basically very simple, very basic, and you start out with something extremely minimal that you absolutely can't achieve. Like, could you eat a protein at the beginning of every meal? Yep, it might just be a quarter cup of cottage cheese. It might be 1 hard-boiled egg. It might be, half a chicken breast. But you could do it. You could actually do that. And then you just progressively overload all these things from there. But that's how it goes for me. It's basically like this simple diet exercise bifurcation. You have a formal exercise program with cardio resistance, maybe also throw a step count in there. On the diet side, it's protein prioritization, and then lower energy density on the carbs and the fats. And you just progressively overload everything. You start with something really tiny, really sustainable, so easy that you're going to achieve it and feel good about it. And then you just kind of progress it from there.
I love it. I really like the idea of just start with the small things that actually give you that empowerment. Okay, I can do this shit. I can do this, and I just get the momentum going. Now, when we think about doing these changes, how do you program, let's say, this overload or these changes progressively? Because you may not see a patient in 2 months. So what do they have to do from now into 2 months time, so they are not just sticking with the same 49 donuts and 2 eggs? Or
Right.
how do they do it every week, or do they just go, okay, once you feel comfortable, let's move to the next step? But if you're giving that, maybe they never feel comfortable. So how do you actually give them a little bit more guidance and accountability so they can actually get there?
Right. On the exercise side, it's a little easier because with any resistance training, you can just have people AMRAP everything. Like, okay, every day you're going to do 1 set of as many push-ups as you can. And then that will just organically build because people are trying to do as many as possible. Sort of a similar thing with the cardio. You can just tell people, okay, walk on an incline every day for 15 minutes. Done. but then you just try to go a little bit steeper every time and a little bit faster every time, just whatever you can handle. And then it's pretty easy for people to progressively overload that on by themselves. You know what I mean? So on the exercise side, it's a little bit easier. You prescribe a time, and then you have people crank up the intensity or the frequency or the volume or the difficulty, or something that changes the intensity on kind of on their own and go by feel. On the diet side, it, there are a couple different ways to do it. First of all, you could say, okay, we're just going to start with breakfast. Your whole goal is to make breakfast really healthy. You're going to have a ton of protein. You're going to eat 40 grams of protein. It's going to be a lean protein. You're going to keep the refined carbs and the refined fats low. Breakfast is where you're going to nail it. The rest of the day is not as big a deal. And then once people have that dialed in and they're totally nailing that and they're getting this one great meal a day, then you could throw in something else like, okay, and every day we're going to drink a whey shake half an hour before dinner or an hour before dinner. And that's going to be another progression, you know what I mean? A pre-meal protein bowl, so like a protein preload basically for another meal. And then you can kind of like whittle your way through their day where they're cleaning up their breakfast, then they're making some tweaks to lunch, then they're throwing in a protein shake pre-meal as a preload, then they're working on dinner, you know what I mean? And then like you would like leave dessert alone for now, and then you would just like slowly work your way through their day, usually starting with breakfast and then making improvements, chronologically throughout the day. And that's one way to overload that. Um, that's kind of my favorite, is like start with breakfast, throw in a bunch of protein. And actually just doing that is such a massive intervention for so many people. It's just absolutely huge.
Now, I have a question. Okay. I love that you're giving such a big point to breakfast, but most of the times, a lot of people that I know that struggle with weight, they don't eat breakfast. So one of the biggest things that I find to reintroduce and get the habit come back, or like just introduce the habit of having breakfast, is a huge deal, because some people, they just don't even have breakfast because of their lifestyle or just habit, and then they just go to have a brunch type lunch because the dinner is their biggest meal. So they are not really hungry by the time they wake up, and they just have a coffee and that's all they have. But now I find that having breakfast for me is just setting up your day for success. But the thing is, a lot of people may go like intermittent fasting, or I don't know. How important for you is breakfast, and how do you actually get people to get that habit as a something that is a priority, to start modifying their habits and behaviors regarding to their diet?
Right. That's a little bit tricky because I know that front loading your calories in the day chronologically and
Mm-hmm.
basically having more of a daytime eating window is better. Earlier eating is better. Front loading calories earlier in that window is better. So having like huge breakfast, smaller lunch, tiny dinner, and then having all that early in the day would be the absolute best. But it's not a huge big deal. Like if I just told people, I don't care when your first meal is, just we're calling the first time you eat break fast, breaking your fast. So
Okay.
if you have breakfast at lunch or at noon or 1 p.m., who really cares? That's what we're going to call breakfast. So for some people, I just basically don't sweat the timing detail at all. Let them do whatever's convenient for them. And we're just talking about the first meal you eat in the day. Now, would it be better if that person was actually waking up early, sitting in the sun for half an hour, getting a bunch of light in their eyeballs, immediately eating the biggest meal of their day with the most protein? Yes, that would be better, but I think, adherence and letting people do what they want is such a big deal for compliance that early eating window versus late, you're talking for sure just a single digit percent improvement if you're eating earlier. So it's not that big a deal. And since I think the compliance and letting people do what they want is a bigger deal, I'm not really sweating that detail. Although I do encourage people to try to eat a little earlier in the day, a little sooner in the day. I would say that's optimum to eat earlier, but I also think it's a single digit percent issue if people don't. And if your first meal is at noon, I'm not that worried about it. One thing I do tell people is that, like, if you're just super not hungry all morning long, you probably ate too much the night before. So just try, don't eat dinner, just fast through dinner. You wake up way hungrier, and then you're more likely to eat earlier in the day. You know what I mean? So you can start that by just skipping your last meal someday, and then you're a little more prone to eat. You're like, oh, hey, it's breakfast time, if you know what I mean. So that's one way to kind of encourage people to be a little earlier. If you think their first meal is getting ridiculous, like, 4 in the afternoon, or like I have people start their eating window like when the sun sets, and I'm like, okay, that's a little bit much. Maybe you should skip dinner sometime and then try to eat earlier when you're actually hungry.
If we have someone who struggles perhaps with nighttime eating or binge eating, probably not the the amount of clients or patients you work with, but would you feel like breakfast would need to be a bit more mandatory to break that habit of, okay, like I tell you, because that is my approach when I work with clients that they really struggle with nighttime eating or binge eating, because there is kind of like a vicious cycle. Like, okay, I won't have breakfast, so I save calories for tonight, and then I have a massive meal, but end up being probably way more than they were expecting because of some struggles emotionally, mentally, whatever. Oh, some even it could be part of habitual eating. Now, once you sort of like try to switch everything and just make strategic meal times and make them more compulsory, do you think that that helps to set them up for success when it comes to managing those extra, because they are just following the same vicious cycle. Like if they don't ever have breakfast and they don't eat throughout the day because they're saving calories, they will be so ravenously hungry by the time they have to eat at night that they don't even have control over how much they eat. And then that becomes, again, they full, they ate 3,000 calories. Why should I eat for breakfast if I can save my calories and eat a huge meal at night?
I mean, I do totally agree. If you're trying to not binge eat at night, you want to eat way earlier in the day. You want to eat way more protein earlier. You want a huge breakfast, tons of protein. You want to have already hit your protein goal for the day. You're going to just find that you're in your pantry at 10 o'clock at night trying to find some crackers, a lot less. Um, However, like the only pushback I have to that is I have some patients who, if they eat a huge meal, and a lot of carbohydrate very close to bedtime, they get a lot nicer triggering of a parasympathetic state. You know what I mean? So a
Yep.
lot of people, when they're fasting, their sympathetic nervous system is really activated. It's this fight or flight thing. You have a literally a higher heart rate. Your basically your adrenaline is a little bit higher, if you know what I mean. And so if some people uh, save some sort of low energy density carb for the very end of the day so they can eat a large volume of this and get this sort of stomach fullness and this carbohydrate closer to bedtime. They
Differentiate the difference between energy density and nutrient density. So we have these two terms that I think not everyone understands, and why it is important to have the right ratio between nutrient density and energy density, obviously depending on your goals and what is needed in order to make you healthier. If there is anything that we need to address in terms of any health conditions, type 2 diabetes, or just about reducing your cravings or managing insulin resistance. So how can we determine or define these two terms, energy density and nutrient density, and how do we manage to merge these two specifically for a patient?
Right, right. Okay, so when we talk about energy, we're really talking about just calories that your mitochondria are going to burn to power everything in your body. And these are mostly carbon chains with high energy carbon bonds. And that can either be carbohydrate or hydrocarbon, which is fat, interchangeably. So carbs and fats are, in my opinion, energy. These are basically calories. And you could have a refined carb and a refined fat that's just pure energy, sugar and oil, for example. There are no nutrients. It's really just pure calories. It's basically like straight gasoline. So nutrients for me would be something that your body's not going to burn for energy, which is protein, most predominantly. This is something that your body does not like to burn for energy, and it's mostly structurally and functionally in your body. So you've got protein, and then you've got micronutrients, which is basically vitamins and minerals. So I would put maybe a few of the essential fatty acids in the nutrient category as well.
Okay.
But since you only need a dozen grams a day or so, that's pretty small. It's almost a micronutrient level requirement. So for me, nutrient density is how much protein, vitamins, minerals, and essential fatty acids a food would contain. Specifically, you could look at the density either in a per calorie term or per weight and or volume of food. So there's like three different ways you could look at density. But it's most helpful, I think, to look at nutrients per calorie. So that's, I come at this from the PE diet kind of mindset where you're looking at protein to energy, and that's kind of nutritional density to caloric density type of thing. So for me, there's nutrient density, which is how much protein, vitamins, and minerals per calorie. And then there's energy density, which is how many calories a food has per gram of food. It's like how much weight and volume of a food you get to eat, and how many calories are coming along with that. And the reason that's important is because our GI tracts, which slowly evolved over 1.5 million years, expect us to eat about 3 pounds of food a day. And that 3 pounds of food could have 1,500 calories in it, or it could have 3,000 calories in it. And you're just going to automatically eat more when your same weight and volume of food has more calories. And we have studies showing that humans basically eat a certain weight and volume of food daily. And if that's got twice the energy density that then your body's used to, you are going to overeat calories. And I'm mostly talking carbs and fats. So that's kind of for me how I would look at energy density, which is basically carbs and fats or calories per unit of weight or volume of food. And then nutrient density is how much protein and minerals and vitamins and micronutrients in food per calorie. It's pretty easy to lump micronutrients together with protein since they tend to track together. Statistically, they're associated. So the higher a food is in protein, the higher it is in micronutrients for the most part. So I like to really just kind of look at how much protein's in a food and then how many non-protein calories from carbs and fats. And that's what the PE ratio is really all about.
I really like the concept that you're working on, and I actually think you have a project coming around the satiety per calorie. So talk to me a little bit more about how did you come up with this concept of satiety per calorie, and how do we actually ensure that we're eating foods that give us that satiety with not so much calories, if that's the goal that we're trying to aim for.
Right. Well, I absolutely did not come up with the concept of satiety per calorie. This is something that exists in the scientific literature and in the medical literature. It's just hardly ever mentioned. It's just extremely undervalued, in my opinion. So I'm just kind of shining a light on this concept. And there are certain qualities of food that are evidence-based to improve the satiety you get from that food versus the number of energy calories from that food. Protein is a huge one. The higher the protein percent, the better the satiety per calorie. Higher amounts of fiber, the amount of grams of fiber per 1,000 calories, the higher that is, usually the higher satiety per calorie. The lower a food is in refined energies, which is refined carbs, refined fats, alcohol. These all tend to worsen satiety per calorie. The water content of a food, so the more water in a food, the higher the satiety per calorie, mostly because it's a huge contributor to weight and volume for no calories at all. So it's like protein, fiber, water raises satiety per calorie. Refinement of carbs, fats, and alcohol worsens satiety per calorie. There are some other factors too, like certain hedonic combinations really trigger overeating because they're so palatable and pleasurable and hedonic and tasty and delicious and dopamine spiking. And that's your high energy density carbs and fats together. A food that's high carb density, high fat density together at the same time. Your donuts and your pizza and your cupcakes and your all of your candy bars. These are like super high carb, super high fat together, really tasty and delicious. You're just going to eat more. Something that's high fat with a lot of salt in it, that's your pepperoni and your cheese. And people are definitely going to eat more of that. So it's going to have lower satiety per calorie because it's so tasty. High carb and high salt as well. So like your pretzels and your savory snacks, these are something that people are going to eat a lot more of. So yeah, you're trying to get more protein, fiber, water. You're trying to be lower in carbs, lower in fat, lower in energy density, lower in these hedonic combinations, the carbs and the fats, the sugars, the salt, and you can actually kind of roll them all together and then give foods a satiety score. And that's what I'm working with Diet Doctor on. So Dr. Andreas Einfeld of Diet Doctor fame and the Diet Doctor team have spun off this sort of little side company called Hava, H-A-V-A. And people can check it out at hava.co. But basically, we're calculating the satiety per calorie of foods, looking at all these different parameters, and then attempting to give foods a 0 to 100 score, where 100 would be like the highest satiety per calorie anything could ever have, and that would be something like watercress or certain types of lettuce. It's like 40% protein, huge amount of fiber and water, and like no calories at all. Super crazy high satiety per calorie. And then the worst would be something that's really high carb, high fat, high energy density together with very little protein, no fiber, hardly any water, and that's like a donut or a chocolate chip cookie, or some of these foods are a 0. And so we're that's what we're doing. We're basically just arraying all these foods out on a spectrum based on satiety per calorie, and it is based on any studies we have that look at effect size and effect quantity of more or less fiber in a food, or more or less protein in a food, or higher or lower energy density. Nobody's really done a lot of studies where all these are combined together at once, and so we're kind of trying to combine things together that haven't been directly looked at together. So it's a little bit of a new direction. But directionally, it fits the evidence base really, really well. And that's what I've been working on. It's pretty cool.
When you're thinking about satiety per calorie and you want to recommend and do more so a practical recommendation, is this based on just like satiety per calorie of this food, or can you make a recommendation based on a portion size, like actually practical portion size? Like if I have a slice of bread, is this something that can be recommended as like, well, this per 80 calories, the degree of satiety is, I don't know, 70% or something like that? Or how do you make these recommendations based on these combinations of satiety per calorie?
Right.
Is it a practical portion size?
No, it has absolutely nothing to do with portion size whatsoever.
Okay.
We do not care at all what amount people eat of anything. We don't care how many calories you eat. We don't care how big your portion size is. The only thing we care about is food choice, right? So if you chose a Krispy Kreme donut, that's just like literally has a satiety score of 0. It's just like sugar and fat, and they're also delicious, by the way. Um, we don't care if you're eating half a donut, one donut, the whole dozen donuts. They're all 0. So choosing that, it's a 0 food. If you made some protein donuts, if you use a whey casein blend and you put in some applesauce and you threw in an artificial sweetener and you baked up some protein donuts that were 45% protein and had fiber and a much higher moisture content, and for these really dense things that you ate one and you're super full, that would have satiety score of 60 maybe. And we literally don't care. We don't care if you ate a whole dozen of those. We don't care if you ate a half of one. We don't care if you ate the whole thing. You're basically just going to eat The reason we don't care is because everyone eats until they're not hungry anymore. Like everyone eats to satiety. And it's just food choice. If you choose the protein donuts, you're gonna eat as many as you want until you're full, and that's only going to be 400 calories. If you choose the Krispy Kremes, you're going to eat as many as you want until you're full, and it's going to be 2,000 calories.
Okay.
And so it kind of doesn't matter. The premise is that everyone's just going to eat until they're not hungry anymore. And the goal is, if you choose something that's a little bit higher, then you're just going to automatically eat less calories. And this is also something that we're trying to kind of progressively overload. Like, we're not saying, okay, go from the standard American diet, which has a satiety score of around upper 20s, maybe, 28, 29. And now all you eat is just celery and lettuce. That's not going to work. So it's like, okay, you make these tiny little substitutions. If you eat eggs and bacon for breakfast, maybe eat eggs and Canadian bacon.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? That's going to have like double the satiety score, and you're going to eat till you're full, but you're actually going to eat less calories eating the satiety of eggs and Canadian bacon than of eggs and bacon, just from the fat density of the meat product there. People can eat way more calories from bacon than they can from like ham or Canadian bacon or turkey bacon or something leaner. So you're just making these little substitutions. And the idea is, once you're kind of familiar with how to make little swaps, you don't really even need the satiety score. The actual number doesn't matter. It's just a concept where you're aiming higher than you were before by substituting out something with a little higher protein or a little higher fiber or a little higher water content or a little bit lower fat or low carb this, low fat that, low calorie something else. And you're just trying to get the carbs, fats, energy density lower, the protein, fiber, water higher.
I love that concept because it can be useful for either direction. So, like, I work with patients in the hospital where they actually struggle to eat and they are malnourished. So I actually think the satiety per calorie is quite good because you can try to reach for those that are very low satiety, higher calorie. So that's like high protein, high energy diet that gives you the protein you need, because patients that are malnourished have lost so much muscle that is one thing that is a big priority. But on top of that, the amount of calories we need to eat per portion of food has to be higher. So I like this satiety per calorie can be used depending on the goal, like interchangeably, because yes, we have patients that need to lose weight and they have to make some smart swaps. So they get more satiated with less calories, but you can actually eat more volume. So you feel full, but you're also feeling like you're getting adequate amount of nutrients and there's no nutrient deficiency, because we do see obese patients with malnutrition. They are losing muscle. They are not eating adequate amount of nutrients at all. So by making these swaps of not just the satiety portion, but also the nutrient density, that makes a huge impact in how the outcome could be. Now, I wanted to chat with you about this specific concept of how, when you have someone that struggles with cravings, or if you think about cravings being something that you could either ignore or use your willpower through it and just forget about it, or you could just pay attention to the craving, satiate it, and move on. What would you do? What would you recommend when it comes to dealing with cravings? Should you ignore it and willpower it, or should you pay attention to it, satisfy it, and then move on? What would you do?
So I like a sort of a harm reduction technique where you make or find a slightly better version of whatever you're craving, the slightly higher satiety per calorie version, and then just eat the hell out of it. Just eat as much as you want. You know what I mean? So anything, any kind of recipe that's lower carb, lower fat, higher protein, lower energy density, that is, like, it's basically, if you, eat the most delicious thing you've ever had, and it's a 10 out of 10, and it's amazing, and you're craving like crazy, but you're going to eat an extra trillion calories. Uh, but you could make a slightly healthier version that was maybe a 7 out of 10. It's still pretty good. Like, you're going to enjoy it. It's just not as mind-blowingly good. But if you ate this version, you're maybe not going to eat any extra calories at all. That's going to fit right in. That's kind of my strategy, is like come up with a version that's just a little bit better, a little bit higher study per calorie, and then eat all you want. You don't have to feel bad. You don't have to feel guilty. You can go crazy, and you're still pretty much on track. I mean, either maybe even improving while you're doing it if you have a good enough version, or just it's not going to be as detrimental if you have something that's, an 8 out of 10, but a little bit extra calories. So for me, it's like, okay, somewhere in the middle. There's a middle ground there where, okay, I want, Haagen-Dazs, I'm craving it, I'm just gonna eat it, I'm gonna eat all I want, I'm not even gonna worry about it. Or you're like, okay, I'm getting this like Halo top, and I'm just gonna eat as much as I want of that, and that pretty much satisfies my cravings, but I'm also more or less still on track. And that's what I like. I like the harm reduction, middle of the road, get a slightly better version, and then go for it strategy.
I like that strategy because it is a smart strategy. A lot of people either they are all or nothing, like, oh, I either eat this or I don't eat it. But if you find something that can be very similar and can give you that satisfaction, but it's not as hedonic and so delicious that it just invites you to eat more, it is a good thing. Now, it could be something that maybe you can't replicate. For example, like I don't know, cookies and cream Hershey's. Like, you probably can just find a single packet instead of like buying the whole packet and just try to eat it mindfully and slowly. But sometimes there are foods that are not easy to replicate or find a swap for it. But I get the point that it is very smart to just try to find a healthier version if you can, that is still have a good score, because there are swaps, or there are like replicas of things that they have been made healthy, but they are just shit. They taste horrible. Like, I still want the other thing. So I see this a lot. Like, we start eating. Okay, I have a craving for chocolate. I better start eating a chocolate bar with fruit. I don't know. But I really wanted that chocolate. So they are still thinking about the chocolate, but they ate something else. And then, okay, well, this is not good enough. I want something else. So they end up eating something else. And it's not what they wanted. So they kind of, okay, fuck it. I'm going to eat the chocolate. So they end up eating not just a chocolate bar, something else, but they also ate the chocolate bar. So it would have been easier if they just ate the thing and got satisfied. But I guess it is and how do you manage that? Because, okay, there are things that are going to not potentially be as straightforward. Like, I can find a healthy or much easier swap. Like, I do my own pizza at home, and I am super happy with it. I am no cravings at all for pizza because I can make a very nice version of it. And that is what you're mentioning. Just find a healthier version. It is 400 calories, and I eat a full thing just for myself. Amazing. But now there are a lot of things that may not have that easy swap. So would you recommend to go for it and maybe just find a different strategy, like find a single packet or something super small that is not going to invite you to eat much more of it because there's no more of it, and then just implement healthy, mindful strategies? Okay, make sure you are actually there. You're focused on the pleasure and the intensity of the taste and everything, and you're not like just eating mindlessly because there's no point.
I mean, for me, I would be like, okay, go for it. You can't tell yourself I will never again in my whole life eat cinnamon roll. You can't do that for a lot of people. Like, you
Yeah.
have to. You can't take these things completely away from them. And then there are a lot of strategies, I think, for minimizing the damage. Like, I definitely like saving these things for dessert. There's a reason why people eat dessert at the end of a meal, at the end of the day, because you just have a less distance to fall. Imagine if like the very first thing you did in the morning is just eat all you wanted of your favorite cheat food, and that's how you started the day. I mean, like things are going downhill from there. But if you had like a reasonably good eating day and you ate a full meal, you had lots of protein and lots of fiber, lots of weight and volume, and you're not that hungry, then I think you can mindfully eat this dessert, even if it's the 10 out of 10, full calorie version, and maybe it's not going to be quite as damaging. So I do like some of these mindfulness strategies where you're eating it intentionally for dessert after you've already eaten everything else. And also, if this is something that you go out to eat and eat it on location, so you don't have it at home. So it's not like you can, like, wake up at midnight and eat 50 of them or something like that. A lot of people have these sort of addictive type tendencies, and so they have to be really careful with this sort of thing. So it might be safer for them to eat it when they're eating out, so it's not at home. I'm sure there are people out there who just have to, for some period of time, not eat stuff like that because they have such a strong addiction to it. Just like some of my alcoholic patients, they basically just never drank, and that works way better for them. And I think only the individual is going to know if that's going to be the best strategy for them or not. But for me, it's like step one, try to replicate it with a healthy version like your pizza, which sounds amazing. Step two, if you just absolutely have to have it as a very mindful dessert at the end of the day, at the end of a meal, maybe outside of, when you're eating out at a restaurant. And then you just don't have as fall to far, as far to fall afterwards, if you know what I mean. And then, like, there is somebody out there who needs to just avoid that stuff, at least temporarily, due to some sort of triggering or addictive chemistry. And they know who they are, and that's fine too, I think. Everyone has to really, you're the only person on earth who knows exactly what's going to work the very best for you, not anybody else. So that, you have to kind of like search your feelings and figure out which of these strategies is best for you. But I think there is a little bit of role for maybe all three of those.
Do you believe that there are different types of hunger?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. So humans have very specific appetites for all of the things we need in our diet. We have very specific protein appetites. We have specific carbohydrate appetites. We have appetites for fat. We have appetites for sodium. We have appetites for calcium. There's evidence for all these things that humans have an appetite for, a taste for. And then there's different types of eating. There's homeostatic eating, where you just know you have to eat to replace calories because you're constantly burning calories 24 hours a day. And then you have to eat to replace things you've lost, like electrolytes in sweating and protein from all the skin cells that slough off your body every day. So there's homeostatic eating, where you're just eating to replace this stuff. Then there's hedonic eating, where you're eating for like emotional reasons. It's comforting, it's social, it's fun, it's entertaining, it's dopamine spiking. It can be, somewhat addictive. I mean, you can get all of this different types of appetites, and it's super complicated. And there's this duality of food in human lives, where you have to eat to just be alive, but then you kind of want to eat too, because there's evolution in nature has realized that you have to make things kind of pleasurable if it's going to keep the organism alive, and then painful if they don't do it, but they should be. That's why, like, really, really hungry, getting really hungry is like the stick, and the pleasure of food is like the carrot, and your body's using both to motivate you to do the things that it thinks are going to keep you alive in the winter or whenever the calories are scarce. So there are these different appetites, and I definitely think that it's important to be aware of those and realize what you're hungry for at any given time.
Would you add to those type of hunger? I would put them as a more like the one that you're trying to satiate your hunger because there's a true physical hunger. I would call it personally physical, just physical hunger. And the other one that you mentioned is more like I would kind of like separate it in different little ones. Like there's like emotional hunger where you're pretty much doing it because of your emotional eating. It's more like a dependence of a coping mechanism to eat. There's like a habitual hunger. Like you're just used to eat certain things that you're not necessarily need, or you're not necessarily hungry, but it's just part of your habit and your routine. I like using also like practical hunger. Sometimes you have to eat just because you know that there's going to be a period of time that you won't be able to eat anything at all. Like when I go to my shift at work, I won't eat for 7 hours, so I have a very huge breakfast, even if I'm not as hungry. But I am kind of setting up myself for success. I don't know. What do you think about those forms of? They're not hunger, but it's like categorizing this in a way that there are different ways why we eat, and this is like certain reasons that justify, well, if we can identify what the type of hunger is, maybe it's easier for us to address if there's any actual issue around it, like emotional eating or habitual eating. Like, do you really need to eat this if that is actually affecting your weight or like anything else that is related to that?
Yeah, no, I like that. And so many people eat just because it's time to eat or because everyone else is
Mm-hmm.
eating. And that's very separated from actual internal hunger and fullness. So sometimes there's a big disconnect there. And it is nice if people can be really, really in touch with themselves and be super aware of their own hunger and fullness, independent of all of these external cues. So I like where you're going there. I do think that's important. I think that it's nice to be aware of like why are you eating right now, and it's also nice to be really really in touch with hunger and fullness. I like people to look at either analog scales of hunger and fullness and try to like figure out exactly where they're at numerically, like how hungry are you. It's like, for me it's, could you eat a skinless chicken breast right now? Could you eat a pound of skinless chicken breast and a pound of asparagus? If yes, you're hungry. You're actually physically hungry. It's not just time to eat. You're actually hungry. You know what I mean? So it's nice to be in touch with this hunger and fullness, and to try to figure out if you're actually, homeostatically hungry or not. So yeah, I like that a lot.
There are people that want to lose weight, but maybe they're not ready to track, or they are not necessarily tracking at all just because of their age, they just don't technologically savvy, or whatever reason we could use to just not track or not use an app to track your calories. What are some of the ways that you would recommend for someone that won't track to lose weight without falling into these extremes diets that, oh, well, you have to completely eliminate carbohydrates or just completely eliminate these? So it is a way to ensure a calorie deficit, but it becomes a bit of a double-edged sword that can trigger a, going you to a rabbit hole later on, or just it may imply that you're restricting something that you like, and then this could cause an eating disorder along the lines after. But how can we do a very solid and practical recommendation for someone who wants to lose weight that won't be able to track, or they just don't want to track?
Which is everybody, right? So everyone hates tracking. Nobody ever tracks. Tracking's awful. I get that. I understand that, right? And there are so many people that are just absolutely no, they're not going to go low carb. They're not going to go low fat. They're not going to go carnivore. They're not going to be vegan. They're not going to go on any kind of particular major disruptive diet change. They're not going to do any of that. And for those people, my favorite like micro version of tracking, like just like tiny micro tracking, is basically protein awareness. I'm like, okay, you're not going to track anything except you're just going to pay attention to how many grams of protein you got at breakfast. Just one time, just tomorrow. That's it. Just eat your breakfast and count up how many grams of protein that was. Because what you're going to find out is that your pancakes and your waffles and your syrup and your whipped cream and your butter and your cereal and like this had no protein in it at all, like as absolutely zero. And we're going to be mindful of the fact that protein supports your lean mass, and the carbs and fats support your fat mass, and you're trying to get more lean mass and less fat mass. So protein is the priority here. More protein is good, less carbs and fats is good, and you have no idea what you're eating because you're not tracking, and we're going to respect that. But you have to be a little bit more aware of protein because we want you to eat at least triple digit protein grams a day. Like you should be, every adult trying to improve body composition should be eating 100 grams of protein a day. Please, dear God, I'm like begging people to get to triple digits if they're, any full-size adult should be, any full-size adult who's trying to improve body composition should hit a triple digit protein gram for the day. Ideally, before they're like stuffed and ate too many carbs and fats and then just pour a whey shake on top of that, you're trying to hit this protein first and prioritize it. And so my favorite thing is to have people just be protein aware. I'm like, I just want you to roughly know how many grams of protein you ate for breakfast because I wanted you to eat 30 or 40 minimum, and you're eating 6 right now. And that's horrible, and you need your eyes open to that, like how bad your breakfast choices are, because they're absolutely terrible. And it's like breakfast in America is a nightmare. It's just a complete disaster, and that is like the single biggest problem in this country is the ratio of protein to non-protein energy at breakfast is the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing I see that people are doing wrong. It's like when I'll do a diet recall with somebody. I'm like, okay, just tell me what you ate yesterday, just roughly. What did you have for breakfast? What did you have for lunch? What did you have for dinner? Inevitably, I'm just appalled at what they had for breakfast. Like, I don't even care who it is. But if they're in the clinic and I'm trying to work in their body composition, I'm appalled by whatever they had for breakfast yesterday, and we're going to talk about it. And so for me, that's like that's where it's at. It's like, okay, now what you're going to do is be protein aware because I've opened your eyes to it. You can't not be aware now. And the goal is to get more protein without eating more carbs and fats. So you either just take the protein part of your meal and amp it way up, or throw in some protein that you just didn't have before. And so for me, that's kind of the lowest hanging fruit for people who aren't going to track and aren't going to make any major changes. You know what I mean?
Would you add to that equation maybe tracking fiber or a way to add like more vegetables that you will fill you up more and somehow will reduce the amount of other sources of food that you can get and sort of give you that nutrient per calorie, more less energy density, more nutrients, more vitamins, minerals, things like that, that will also help you to manage hunger and cravings.
Right. Well, for me, the protein would be just step one, and then hopefully it's a slippery slope. And then step two would be you have to eat some sort of low energy density food that's going to give you a huge weight in volume. Maybe you have to just eat an entire cucumber with every meal, just like a machine, just eat a cucumber because it's like this giant amount of weight in volume for no calories. And so like, but it could be honestly any vegetable that people like or something like that. And so you are trying to, as step two, get the energy density of the carbs and fats lower, and you're going to do that with some sort of lower energy density item like a vegetable of some sort. And for me, that would be a progression above protein awareness and some sort of protein targeting. But yeah, that would definitely be next on the list for sure. Like some sort of low energy density thing. Like, what are you eating that's giving you a huge weight in volume of food and fullness is tidy for very few calories. Right now, it's nothing. It's donuts, but it could be a cucumber or a carrot or something like that. Something that's lower energy density. So yeah, absolutely, that would be the very next thing to work on.
Okay, so we have number one, protein. Number two, more nutrient dense foods incorporated in your diet. What would be number three? Like if we were thinking about maybe not snacking and just mainly main meals, or would you think about portion control? What would be like the next best thing, like number three in your list?
Yeah, for me, it would be not snacking. So, humans, first of all, like we're all overeating calories, but the majority of these overeating calories come from snacks, and snacks it has been a complete disaster, at least in America. And the more people can eliminate snacking and just bolus their feeding into discrete, separate meals, your classic, 3 meals, this is always better. That's kind of how your body's designed. That it's much easier for you to track satiety when you are bolusing your food and having these discrete meals versus just kind of constantly grazing all day long. So yeah, absolutely, the attempt to not snack, I think, is huge. I think that's kind of what is powering intermittent fasting to a certain extent, is basically cutting snacking off at least the tails of your eating window, the two ends of it. You know what I'm saying? So for me, intermittent fasting is a way of basically just not snacking 24
Okay.
hours a day. So yeah, like not snacking would be next on my list. That I think it would be a huge, huge thing.
Would you put in, let's say we have 4 steps. The fourth step, what would be for you? Mindful eating, slowing down perhaps, or would you say that there is something more important to that that would be your number 4?
It's basically slowing the eating process.
Yep.
So the rate at which calories enter your body is a massive big deal. The more you can slow down the rate at which calories enter your mouth, the better off you're going to be. So that could be surface hardness of a food that's harder, that you have to chew a lot. Oral processing time, if you have to chew it a ton, if it's harder, if you just cannot physically swallow as many calories per minute, you're just going to have higher satiety per calorie. We have studies where they take 2 identical foods with the exact same macros. One of them has a harder surface hardness, requires more oral processing. Your ingestion rate in terms of calories per minute is lower. You're just going to automatically eat less. That's part of why energy density is a big deal, is because you can just get the calories in your body faster in a high energy density food than in a low energy density food. So it's basically like hardness, surface hardness, chewing, oral processing time. That's why I like snacks like air popped popcorn, where you have to do a lot of chewing. It's a very large volume food for the amount of calories, and so this is something that gives people a pretty high satiety per calorie just because of the chewing and the oral processing. And that's why I like it when people snack on something like carrots, right? The energy density of a carrot is so low. You have to eat 18 pounds of carrots to get 2,400 calories. It's absurd. And you have to chew it so much. It's so hard. The fiber is incredibly high. The energy density is incredibly low. The oral processing time is super, super, super high. So it's like an amazing snack. So this sort of slowing down the eating process, because you have to chew the hell out of it, is something I like. My least favorite is portion size, or saying, okay, just eat, try to eat just less. I'm like, okay, if you actually choose the right food, you can kind of eat as much of it as you want, because you're just not going to get into trouble. You know what I mean? If I just locked somebody on a desert island and all they've got is fish and salad, I don't have to limit their portion. I'm like, you eat as much as you want. I literally don't care. You will not be overeating that. And so I prefer to let the food choice organically determine how much people are going to eat, rather than just artificially limiting them. Okay, weigh this out, and you can only have half of one carrot. I'm like, no, you eat carrots and you just go crazy and eat all the carrots you want. I literally don't care. And so I like it better when you don't have to limit quantity artificially.
I like I like that. I like that you're saying let the food choice dictate how much you're going to eat, because you're going to be more fuller if you eat a higher nutrient dense food than a lower nutrient dense, higher energy density. So that is awesome, and I really like that we have 4 steps to get to lose some weight without necessarily tracking. So prioritizing protein is number 1. Number 2 is going to be eating more nutrient dense, increasing fiber intake. Number 3 would be, which one was?
Oh, snacking. Yeah,
The
getting rid of
snacking.
snacking.
Okay, okay. And if you do a snack smart. So choose things that are higher nutrient dense and more higher in terms of protein and lower in energy dense. So like you said popcorns, air popcorns, or something with protein. And then we have number 4, which is choosing foods that are more, that you'll have to spend more time chewing them, and like will slow down the process of eating. And maybe not so much liquid or jelly things that are just so easy to drink, and don't drink your calories essentially.
Absolutely.
Perfect. I love these 4 steps. And I think I don't want to overuse your time. So what are some of the things that you're working on right now? You mentioned that you're doing a bit of a work in a project on satiety per calorie. What else is coming for you?
Yeah, I'm writing a book entitled Satiety per Calorie, and eventually it'll be you can go to satietypercalorie.com and just see like a placeholder for that at this time. But yeah, that's gonna show up here hopefully soon. And then I'm really just working with Dr. Andreas Einfeld and those awesome people over at Diet Doctor on this Hava stuff, hava.co. And we're working on an app that's basically just going to hopefully satiety per calorie will be a household term. Everybody will know what that means. Everybody will know what factors raise or lower it. You'll be able to just enter foods and see exactly where they kind of rank. And it's the sort of thing where once you kind of learn how it works, you don't really need to track anymore. So that's what I'm working on right now, and it's just it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Ted, thank you so much for coming over and having a great chat with me. It was awesome to chat with you, and I hope to see you soon.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It's always great to talk to you. I really appreciate it.
Bye, Ted.
All right, bye.
See you guys.